Hi, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this Holocaust commemoration. My name is Peter Eckstein. I'm the Director of Israel Programming for the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. Again, I'd like to welcome you all to this very, very special event as we remember those we lost during the Shoah, the Holocaust, and learn its lessons as we move forward. A few ground rules, if I may. Your mics should all be muted. If they aren't, please do mute them. That way we'll be able to focus on the event we all came to witness. Please make sure that your videos are turned off if that's possible. We will help you with that as well if you need any help with that. We will have an opportunity. You will have an opportunity to ask our survivor questions towards the end of the program. Just click on the chat button and you can post your question in the chat box. The chat button is at the bottom of your Zoom desktop. We will forward them on to her towards the end of the program. For the best viewing experience, please make sure that you are on active speaker view. Top right, click on speaker view and you'll see the person who's speaking. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Hoffman, the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. Michael.
Thank you, Peter. And again, we want to thank all of you for participating in this evening's Yom HaShoah commemoration as we pay tribute to the 6 million precious lives that were senselessly lost during the horrors of the Holocaust. I mean, how incredible is it that we can continue to gather as a community, although in these unique and challenging times, to honor and commemorate the lives that were lost during this most tragic event in our Jewish history. And how amazing is it that hundreds of households throughout Palm Beach County have made it a point to say that we will never forget and we will continue to honor those who perished before us. And we will continue to learn the lessons gained from this senseless act. One of the many lessons we can take from the Holocaust is the importance of resilience and the ability to persist through difficult times, and how we face life's difficulties with courage and patience, as Elie Wiesel so described in his transformative book, Night. Tonight, we come together as a community, virtual as it may be, to remember those who continued to be our heroes, who sacrificed, who persisted in the most difficult of times known to humanity. We're here tonight to say, never forget. It is now my pleasure to introduce Yaara Levy. For the past 2 years, Yaara has served as the young shliach, or Israel emissary for the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. During her time here, Yaara has served as an enthusiastic face for the people and to the state of Israel. She has worked throughout our community, infusing a sense of joy and passion and commitment in what Israel has to offer and how Israel contributes to our Jewish peoplehood. In just a few short weeks, Yaara will be completing her tenure as our young shliach, and she will be returning back to Israel. I want to thank Yaara for her creativity, her passion, and for bringing the people and state of Israel into our Palm Beach Jewish community. Yaara?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. We're going to start with a short ceremony just to open our program today. And I would like to start by sharing with you this beautiful poem that I found while researching for today. And I really feel like these words mirror and explain a lot of what we're feeling during these days. Must cruelty always be? Must inhumanity ever be the signature of man? No, no. We refuse to accept that. We refuse to give hatred the last word, because we know the power of love. We refuse to believe that cruelty will prevail, because we have felt the strength of kindness. Where there is hatred, may we bring love. Where there is pain, may we bring healing. Where there is darkness, may we bring light. Where there is despair, may we bring hope. Make this a better world, and begin with us. We will now light 6 candles representing 6 million Jews, brothers and sisters, who perished during the Holocaust. And while the lighting of the candles, I will recite the Shoah memorial prayer that was written especially for this day. Creator of all, source and shelter, grant a perfect rest under your tabernacle of peace. To those who perished in the Holocaust, our fathers and mothers, our sisters and brothers, our rabbis and teachers, our neighbors and children, the named and those who are unnamed, whose lives were cut off by brutal, vicious, cunning, and calculated violence. May they find peace in the world to come. Remember the survivors who have since passed away, and virtues of people who've died in the land of miracle. In every generation, we remember the works of their hands. And the message of their hearts. Bless the defenders of Israel with safety and strength, and righteous of all nations who provide protection, shelter, and comfort to the Jewish people. Let their deeds be the source of favor in heaven and healing on earth. Put an end to anger, hatred, and fear, and lead us to a time when no one will suffer at the hand of another. Speedily in our days, may the memories of all who faced these horrors be sanctified in joy and the love. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life, a living blessing in their midst. I would like to welcome Susan Shulman Pertnoy. Susan has been a longtime leader and philanthropist in our community. She is the chair of the Israel and Overseas Committee and serves on the executive committee and board of directors. Susan is the host of the weekly news magazine program Mosaic. Susan will be interviewing Mary Eckstein, and we'll be hearing her story in the next hour, but just so you have a sense of who she is. Mary was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1936. As we shall learn, she survived the Holocaust and remained in Hungary until 1956, when she came to America with her husband, Joseph, and her son, Peter. She lived in Syracuse, New York until 1986, when she and her husband moved to Boca Raton, where she currently lives. She is a frequent speaker about her experiences for the Palm Beach County School District. She meets students in schools throughout the area. She is also a treasurer of the Child Survivor Hidden Children of the Holocaust Organization. Susan and Mary, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Yaara. Mary, it's a privilege and an honor to have this opportunity to interview you about your experience. And I'd like to thank you in advance for sharing your story with us tonight. As we just heard, you were born in Budapest, Hungary in 1936. So what was your childhood like before the Nazi takeover? Did you have any siblings? And tell us about any extended family.
Thank you for having me. As I said, I was born in Budapest, in a middle-class family. I was an only child. We were Orthodox. We grew up in a kosher home, Shomer Shabbat. My family lives, my mother's family, my grandmother on my mother's side, and her five siblings and their families, some 70 people, in total, they lived about 2 hours away in another town. My father's family were living in Budapest. And I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. Our building had catwalks, 5 stories, catwalks all around, and the apartments opened from the catwalks. Everybody knew everybody, and most of the people in the building were Jewish. And I had a normal childhood. In 1942, most Hungarian men were taken to forced labor, my father among them. And after that, I didn't see my father much. He did survive though. I was with my mother, and there were a lot of children in the building. I went to a Jewish school, and days went on like a child's. I was busy like a child, played. I was a little kid. I was scared all the time. And the Hungarian Nazi Party, the Yaara Party, was very much in presence, so we were very much afraid of them. They were mostly either older men or teenagers, because the men in their prime were on the front. And they were, I don't know which was more scary, the teenagers or the older men.
What happened in 1944?
1944, March 19th, Germany occupied Hungary. Up until that point, the restriction on the Jews were not so bad in Hungary. And that was me, by the way. And when the Germans came immediately, we had to wear the yellow star. The man, the SS officer who was in charge of the Jewish problem in Hungary was Adolf Eichmann. He was very efficient. He did a very good job. Between March 19th, 1944 and the end of June, all the Jews who lived outside of Budapest were deported. By the end of June, there were no Jews left in the country except the ones who lived in Budapest. The Budapesti Jews had a different fate plan for them. At the end of the war, the Hungarian Jews that totaled 750,000 people, and 558,000 were killed.
Mary, you were 8 years old at that time. So how scary was that for you, and what was it like?
It was very scary because we had air raids every day. So every night we had to go to the air raid shelter, and then we heard the bombs, and then we heard the horror stories of the buildings that were hit. So I was always scared. I was always hungry, because food was scarce, and I wish I had asked more questions of my mother while she was still around, how she managed. We were not starving at that point, but I was always hungry and always scared.
Where did you live during the occupation? Where did they?
When the Germans came in, they immediately ordered all the Jews to move into Jew houses. Certain buildings all over the city were declared Jew houses, and Jews could only live in them. This was not the ghetto yet. Ghetto hasn't been established at that time. But the Jew houses, we had to move in immediately. The building I lived in was a Jew house, so we stayed there, and my whole family, my 2 cousins, my other grandmother and aunt, they all moved into the building. And to be quite honest, it really wasn't so bad. There were so many children. I was busy as a child. Until one night, we heard some big noise, and then we found out in the morning that there was an escaped prisoner from forced labor who was captured in the attic in my building. Our janitor the super of our building was an Holocaust couple, and they called the Holocaust men in, Hungarian Nazis, and the poor man was shot. In the fall, early in the fall, it was declared that the Jews had to move into the ghetto. Now, Raoul Wallenberg, who was a Swedish diplomat, he was working together with the Swiss ambassador Karl Lutz, and they made a deal with Eichmann that they would issue so-called Schutzpässe, safe passes. Anybody could get them. It didn't cost you any money. You didn't have to. You just had to get it. Go to the embassy and get it. Those who had those Schutzpässe were supposedly under the protection of the Swiss or the Swedish government. They were supposed to be Swiss or Swedish
Immunity. They gave you immunity.
Yes, and subjects, Swiss or Swedish subjects. So there were certain apartments that they rented. They were called safe houses, and we had to move in to those places. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way, but that was the plan. My mother was able to get one of these Schutzpässe, and in October, when there was a coup against the Hungarian government and the Nazi Party took over, a Nazi Party took over, we went out and with my mother and my aunt to look for a place. It was October and cold, and it was raining. And my aunt was able to get into a bus, but my mother and I were captured. And we were attached to a transport leaving the city. It was cold and it was raining, and all afternoon we were walking until we got to the edge of the city, to the outskirts, to the brick factory. Now, all over Hungary, brick factories were used as demarcation points for transports, because a brick factory has a lot of outbuildings, a lot of sheds, and very easy to keep track of a lot of people. And so they were using them all over the country. Well, we were taken into one of those sheds. And I remember it was dark, and I remember, I didn't see it, but I heard some women screaming that there were dead bodies all over. I don't know, I didn't see them. My mother parked me in a corner, and she walked over to a Hungarian policeman guarding us, and she begged him to let us go. Now, I don't know what she was thinking. She had no money to give him. And of course, the policeman said, sure, no. But during the week we spent in the brick factory, every morning he would come and take us to a different shed. And then we would find out that the shed we were at before was already emptied out, the people were deported. So after a week we were still there. He did save our lives. My mother had no money to pay him. All she could do was thank him. You know, during this period, there are so many stories around about unexplainable good deeds that people did. They did it out of the goodness of their hearts because they were not paid for it and they were in danger for doing it. I remember while we were in the brick factory, every morning a woman came to the fence and with hot coffee. And if you went to the fence, she would give you hot coffee. Until she was shooed away eventually, but for a while she was doing it. And so there were some good people around, not enough. I don't remember what we ate. We must have been given some food while we were in the brick factory. And I must have had some children to play with. I was 8 years old, and an 8-year-old kid doesn't sit around. no matter how scared she is. But after a week, we were still there. And then one day, they separated the children and made us leave, and we walked back to Budapest. I remember we had to cross the Danube. The Danube is a very wide, deep river, and all the bridges were blown. But what they had, what they called a pontoon bridge, which is boats put one next to the other, a plank laid across on top, and that was the bridge. And the whole thing was wobbly and very unsteady. And I remember when I went across it, I was so scared they're going to throw me in the Danube. When we got to the other side, to the Pest side, there was an air raid. So very quickly we were dispersed in the neighboring Jew houses. The building I was at, there was a German woman, and all night long, she was taking children home. She took 2 at a time. There was a curfew. She played with her life, but she did it. She took me to my home, and the neighbors told us where my aunt found the place, and she took me there. My aunt found a temporary place in an air raid shelter in one of the safe houses building. And then 3 days later, my mother came. My mother, with a group of women, were taken back to Budapest, to the Aerocross headquarters, down to the basement. They were lined up and systematically shot. Before they got to my mother's row, a German officer came in. She stopped the killings, ordered the Aerocross men to let the women go. And that's how my mother survived. Again, you hear unexplainable deeds and believe them because they are true, they happen. At that time, my mother's family, my grandmother and her whole family was taken to Birkenau, and they were already killed, they were already murdered. We didn't know that at the time. So we stayed with my aunt in that temporary place for a few days, and after a while, my mother found us an apartment, and we moved in there. It was a 3-bedroom apartment, some 70 people there. At night, you could not walk because people were lying on the floor, and there was no place to walk because they were all over. I don't know what we ate. I don't know how I spent my days. I remember one day my mother sent me to a neighbor to ask for food, and I got some food. Then one day there were 3 of us little girls, 2 8-year-olds and a 10-year-old. And our mother took the yellow star of our coats, the coat I was wearing on the picture that we showed before. And we went out for food. Can you imagine the desperation of a mother not knowing if she ever going to see her child?
Just amazing. It really was amazing.
When I think about it, I shudder because she must have been really desperate. But we were hungry, we were starving. And then one day, I'm sure we would have starved if the janitor's wife didn't come. I don't know how often she came, but she came more than once with a basket of food for us. She did save our lives. She was a terrible person. She was in jail for 7 years after the war for all the things that she did, but she saved our life. I was hungry, I was scared, but we survived. I didn't ask my mother, I should have asked the questions.
How about your mother's emotional toll? I mean, she watched people being shot in front of her. Do you recall what that might have done to her?
You know, at that time, you were kind of numb. And I think my husband was in Birkenau, and I hear that from him. You became numb, and your aim in life was survive today. And you didn't dwell on what happened. You just wanted to survive. And I think that was my mother's state of mind. She just wanted to make sure to survive today, and tomorrow we'll be still here.
What happened in 1945 during the liberation?
Well, we didn't go to the ghetto. They didn't take us to the ghetto because when the Holocaust men came to the safe house, I don't know, do I have time to go into that?
Yes, yes.
They wanted all the Jews, Budapesti Jews, to be in the ghetto because the plan was for the Budapesti ghetto that all the Budapesti Jews will be taken there, and then at one point the ghetto will be blown up. So when they came to take us to the ghetto, my mother and I, we had kind of a stick going, and I don't know how we got away with it. She lay down in bed that she was sick, and I was her caregiver. And when the Holocaust men came into the room we were at, I was just about handing her a glass of water, and they left us there. At one day, they came and they took the leftover women, and my aunt among them, and she ended up in Bergen-Belsen, but she did survive. So we stayed in the apartment, and the ghetto was a terrible place. We didn't have to go there, we were fortunate. We stayed in the apartment until liberation. And then we went back to our home, and my father came. My father survived. She came toward Budapest with the Russian liberators, and she made arrangements to take us to a town in the east that's already been stabilized. So it was February 1945. So they had a sled, and they put a suitcase on the sled, and on top of the suitcase a comforter, and on top of the comforter was me, and on top of me was another comforter, and the whole thing was tied. And for a week we walked. Every night we spent in a farmhouse, and after a week we arrived to this town. I remember one night we were in a farmhouse, and a drunken Russian soldier came in. You see what happened after we escaped the Germans? We had to be afraid of the Russians because the Russians were taking men to forced labor, and those men ended up in Siberia, and many of them never returned. So when this Russian soldier came in with a gun, my mother and I covered ourselves with a cover, with a comforter in bed. And I peeked out, and I saw that he was brandishing a gun, and my father was trying to get him not to shoot him. And our landlady managed to sneak out and brought in the GPU, which was the military police, and they took the man away. So after we arrived to this town, stayed there for a while, month or so, then we went to my mother's hometown, town named Eger. And then we found that there was nobody left.
So what did you do?
Well, we stayed there, and then one day, my father pricked his left thumb, the beginning of May 1945, pricked his left thumb with a rusty nail and developed sepsis. And on May 24, 1945, after surviving it all, he died because there was no medication.
So sorry, that's horrible. How did you get out of Hungary?
Well, that was much later when I grew up. Are we that short of time? Yeah, okay. Well, I grew up in Hungary under communist Russians, and I went to school. I became an optician. And then one day my mother remarried at one point. My stepfather went to shul on Friday night and met a young man. He brought him home. And he was a Jewish young man, so I didn't introduce him to any of my girlfriends because there were no Jewish boys left in Hungary. So I'm part of a lost generation. And so we got married, and then we had a baby. And then there was a revolution in Hungary. So we put Peter, that's Peter who is the host of this event. He put him in a basket. He was exactly a month old. And we walked 35 kilometers out of Hungary into Austria. And then for us from Austria, we were able to come to America. And we settled in Syracuse, New York. We had another child, our Yankee son. And we lived in Syracuse. We made a living. It was a good place to bring up children. And basically, this is our story.
How were you able to trust anyone outside of the Jewish community after the war? How was trust?
I don't. My boys were telling me that, telling us that, especially my younger son, but I think Peter says to a certain extent that he cannot trust anybody. I have a chip on my shoulder. I always look behind my shoulder because that's my legacy.
What do you want people to know about the Holocaust?
First of all, what hate can do. See, the problem that we cannot accept people who are different from us. And we have to learn to not just to accept, but to respect people who are not like us. Because we all have a right to be in this world. And we are all praying to the same God. And the same God is looking out for us, no matter what mode of prayer we say. And hate destroys it all.
Mary, we have, right at this present time, we have 245 people watching this, and 1,000 other are in programs all over the world. Why are programs like this so important?
Well, because who was it who said that if we don't learn from the past, we're going to repeat it? And we have to learn from what happened. We have to know that, as I said before, we are all the same, regardless of color, regardless of religion, regardless of facial features or culture. We are all the same, and we all have a place in this world, and we have to accept that. Hate destroys it all.
Thank you. I appreciate you really, I know this had to be very difficult for you, and I really appreciate the fact that you were able to tell your story, because it is very important that we all hear it and continue to hear the story of the suffering.
Jump in. People want to ask questions. Please ask them in the chat because we have time, and I know that my mom has a lot more to tell.
Okay, so I have a question. The questions are being sent to me on my phone, so I'm looking down now to read the questions. And here's one for you, Mary. It's interesting that you say that you have a chip on your shoulder, and I respect that. How can we help bridge that gap?
I don't let myself. I don't let myself. I remind myself that my experiences were my experiences, should not happen to other people, and I act accordingly.
Okay. Can you tell us more about your life after the war and before the revolution? Did you go back to Budapest? How difficult was life after the war, and did you experience anti-Semitism then too?
Well, Hungary always had anti-Semitism. That was something we always lived under. So after the war, the Hungarians were saying that more Jews came back than were taken, and they were not happy to see us come back. But under the communism, officially anti-Semitism was illegal. On a personal level, it wasn't, but officially it wasn't. So I went to school. I had a decent life. You know, you have to learn under the communism, you have to keep your mouth shut and you have to toe the line, and you have to be very careful because you said the wrong thing and you ended up in who knows where. But you learn to live with that. It's not an unbearable life. And so I dated. I had a normal teenager life. I dated. I became an optician because I had no hope of ever getting to the university, because under communism there were the workers, the professionals, and the peasants were the farm. And then the fourth category was the elves. I belonged to the elves because my father was a salesman. So no doors were open for me. The other three groups with the backgrounds, they were able to get farther than the ones with my background. So I became an optician because this was about as professional as I could get. And so I got my diploma. I became my, and it was a life. It wasn't, we had food. We couldn't be kosher because kosher food was very expensive. So my mother stopped being kosher. But we managed. Our life was halfway decent, to be quite honest.
The next question, did any American military men liberate Hungary?
No, Russians came.
Was there anti-Semitism in Hungary after, well, yes, you just said that, after the war, especially during I can't understand what this is, during the revolution?
Yes, during the revolution, there were graffiti on the walls that next time we're not going to take you to Auschwitz. I can't translate it, but oh yes, definitely.
How did you maintain your faith in God throughout this? The $1 million question.
Well, if you remember, I told you the story. I grew up with every night before I went to sleep, I said the Shema, the whole thing, ever since I can remember. And then I remember one night in the safe house when I said to myself, if God lets this happen to us, I'm not praying at night anymore. And ever since then, even though I am fairly observant and I light the Shabbat candle and I say the Shema all the time, I cannot say it at night before going to bed, before going to sleep. Something stops me. But my faith is there. I have faith, and for my best ability, I am as good a Jew as I can be.
Do you remember the Jews being marched to the Dona? I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
And being shot there?
Yes, we heard about it, that they were taking people from the safe houses. Actually, they were taken from the safe houses, taken to the Danube and shot them. When I was working in one of my workplace, the manager of the office was a young man, and he was one of those who was shot in the Danube. He jumped a second before, and he swam down a little bit. Now, this was in December 1944, and then he ended up with tuberculosis, and he was never right after that. But yes, I remember hearing a lot about it.
What can we do now to help stand against anti-Semitism and repeat history?
We have to educate people. We have to basically, education is what could stop it. In the schools, that's why I go to schools and talk to schools with children. I don't know how much good it will do, but I tell them about what happened during the war. I tell them my husband's story and my grandmother's story in the camps, and I hope, and I keep telling them that the hate will ruin everything. That we cannot allow hate to run our lives, and hopefully it will do some good.
We have another question. How was the process of becoming a U.S. citizen for you?
Oh yes, well it was quite scary because we had to go to school. I spoke English when I came to America. My husband didn't. He had to go to English classes. I didn't have to do that, but we had to go to citizenship classes. And by that time I had 2 boys, 2 little ones, and we couldn't afford babysitters. So I got the book, and I learned from the book how the U.S. government goes. And then when you applied, actually you had it, the whole day's business, and we had to have an exam. And so I went to the exam, and you had to talk about the government, this and that. And you had to write 10 sentences, English sentences, and you had to be able to spell more words correctly than incorrectly. And I remember the examiner wanted to be very nice to me. And he said, how many stars are in the flag? And I told him. And then he said, how many stripes? I had no clue. I had no idea. I never even thought about it. So I figured I had to say something. So I said, well, originally there were 13 states. He said, oh, very good, very good. I didn't know. I was just double talking.
Have you been back to your hometown?
Yes, I was back in Hungary. The last time I took my family, Peter and his family, in 2005. I haven't been back since.
There are millions of Christians around the world who claim to love Israel and the Jewish people. What advice do you have to them to help undo the wrongs of the past and how we can work together?
Just spread the word. I remember the first time I went to Israel. Do I have time?
Yes. Go ahead.
We flew El Al, and Peter knows the story. And the plane was full of Southern Baptists, born-again Christians. And then in those days, when you saw the Tel Aviv skyline, they would play the Hatikvah. Well, on this plane, they played When the Saints Come Marching in Hebrew. And everybody was dancing. Hallelujah. It was something to see.
Wow. That is something to see.
Yeah, I never forget it.
We're going to go back because somebody had a question of when you had to march across the Danube, how did you survive that? How did you get the strength?
I was scared. I was so scared. It was just very scary because it was at night already, and that whole thing was wobbly, and there were no railing, and there were aeroplanes, men. I can still see them, and I was just very scared.
Do you keep in touch with any of the children that you knew back during the war that you had to live with?
Well, unfortunately, some of them died. There's one girl who I grew up with, and she lives in Queens, and we're very close. But that's all that's left.
Well, I really want to thank you so much for doing this. You gave us quite an education, and your story has to continue to be told. And I appreciate the fact that you go around to schools and tell it, because it's never enough. So thank you very much.
You.
I know it has to be
Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Mom and Susan, for helping us remember. We want to thank all of you for joining us in this very, very special program. We will be sending out an email in the coming days with information about our upcoming commemoration of Israel's 72nd birthday. You should be getting the email this tomorrow or Wednesday. We have a number of different events. Stay tuned for that. Thank you all for taking part in helping us to remember and to commemorate.